صباح الخير, good morning. شكرا على الدعوة. That is my Arabic. I will continue now in English. So it's difficult to bring new aspects now after so many interesting discussions. We have discussed inclusive sports, we have discussed standards, we have discussed differences between countries when it comes to their development. How can they apply international standards and have a uniformed offer so people with disabilities know how to access. Also differences between the regions. So today I'm going to take you through a presentation where we're going to maybe put forward some of the policy documents that our organization has set forward in these last 10 years. What are the challenges? And since the question in this presentation is it becoming good experience for all? I'm also going to speak about some problems that are still not being tackled by the sector. So first of all, we have to talk about inclusive recovery. If we just turn the page back to the way we developed tourism before, I don't think we are proceeding in a good manner because tourism was not inclusive enough from the social perspective. We were chasing the numbers, arrivals, international statistics, but does it really mean that the tourism was inclusive enough, that everybody was enjoying tourism? Well, I don't think so, because there are many qualitative things in tourism that cannot be measured. Measurement is key for decision makers, for investors, because you need to present some statistics and some budget estimates for them to invest. But there are many quality perspectives that you need to analyze when it comes to social perspectives. So for example, by July this year, we have measured in our barometer that is in charge of measuring global trends in tourism that international arrivals have already recovered up to 60% of pre-COVID volume of international travel. I'm not talking about domestic travel because normally it's a much bigger figure. We're talking about people crossing international borders for leisure and tourism. And we had a very good performance in the Middle East region. So you can see that the percentage is about 15% higher because they had different politics here when it comes to opening up destination, and Dubai even surpassed 2019 by 3% more of volume of international travelers flow. So that means that you're doing well, but are we becoming inclusive enough also? So we are recovering number of tourists, but sometimes we have to think about the structure of these tourists and their experience rather than the numbers maybe. Resilience and a broad vision of sustainability, that's something we need to think about in the future, because if destinations and companies are not resilient enough, what they're going to do if there is a new global shock. So what is happening with the countries that cannot subsidize their private sector, their industry? Who is going to pay them the money for the payoff of their workers, for firing their workers? So this is a very fragile industry, but it's also one of the industries that also contributes the most to the global GDP. We are talking about 11, 12%. And in countries like Dubai, I don't know the percentage here, but it might come maybe triple-fold. And we should think about regional and global challenges. Sometimes I say, because of my own disability that happened to me due to cancer 4 years ago, that you cannot choose things that happen to you, but you can choose how to react. What is your attitude towards life? So there are many things, ugly things happening around us. When we speak about tourism, we always speak about the connection and infrastructure as the basics. But if there is no peace, we are doomed. There is nothing we can do if there is no peace, because people do not travel to countries for leisure and pleasure where there is no peace. So this is that we all need to contribute to. Sustainability challenges are multiple-fold. We have climate change, we have circular economy, we have use of plastics. Just think about Dubai, you have drinking water that is bottled, so where does it all go? There are so many people circulating. I'm just taking Dubai as an example because there are so many people coming in and out. And when it comes to my area work, that is social responsibility and social sustainability, we have ethics. Are we having an ethical tourism sector? Are we having an inclusive sector? Are we having social advancement of different groups who are considered as minority groups, but nobody is minority because there are no standard human beings. We all have a bunch of traits that make us very complex human beings. And also, we need to speak about better access for all and seniors. Sometimes we think that we are all going to be young and beautiful and handsome to feature ourselves on Instagram, but life changes. We grow old, we get sick, we get injuries, women get pregnant, they have to push with their husbands the pram, the stroller. So there is no such thing as standard people, as I said. These are all my photos that I take when I travel. The first one is in Granada, in Alhambra, where you can touch the relief in Arabic. I don't know where it says because I'm not speaking Arabic. And this is a cathedral in Monza, in Italy, with an accessible entrance. And why did I take this picture? This is a picture taken in Spain, in a medieval city in the region of Catalonia. So you can see a woman with her children, the grandparents of children are there, the stroller is there, everything is accessible, the old style of the square is preserved. So what are we talking about? We are talking about the quality of life. I don't care if these people are locals or if these people are tourists. We are talking about equality and quality at the same time. What does accessibility bring along? I will not go through the things that we have already discussed yesterday, but the basics is human rights and social integration of 1 billion people. But this figure is not correct anymore because it's already 10 years old. If we have the UN statistics of the World Population Fund, that in 30 years' time and even less, we are going to have up to 25% of population aged in more than 65, you need to sum this up to 1 billion people. So we are talking about 40% of people. People who are aged more than 65, they don't need to have a registered disability. Their hips are different, their knees are different, they can be overweight. So at the end, we all have the same needs. And I'll always say, sooner or later, we'll be on the same boat. Don't you think that accessibility has nothing to do with you if you have all your abilities now, for example, physical abilities or your good sight? Because life will change and it will knock on your door and you will need accessibility put in place. Leisure for end users, as I said, is on the constant rise. Just observe people around yourself. Maybe 10 years ago, all these civil society organizations in Dubai that are so strong now were not visible at all. Maybe these people were just kept indoor because there was not enough environment for them to move, or there was no social and political support as you have it now. So it's very important to know that it's on the constant rise. And we have immense business opportunities because if businesses don't understand why accessibility is good for them, what is the return on the investment, they will not buy only the cause of human rights because they need to know much more. New life to the growing urban areas. So Dubai is a great example. I just took a cab to go yesterday to La Mer just to see how it works on my own with my crutch. And I spent there 2 hours and I said, wow, this is really a good thing that they're doing here because I could just be on my own. I didn't have to ask anybody, where's the toilet? How can I access the beach? Everything was so easy, so you're doing good things. But it's also interesting for you when you have your vision of your urban destination. If you live in a city in the middle of 50, 60 highways, how do you create urban spaces where locals and tourists mingle and you don't need to buy necessarily something just to mingle and walk around? This is something that urban areas should think about because urbanization is a trend that will never stop because we thought that the pandemic people will go rural and we'll move back to the countryside, but this was just a temporary trend. However, besides all these things, we need the global guidance. These are some of the documents that UNWTO has produced in the last 10 years with our disabled people's associations, especially with the European Network for Accessible Tourism and the Spanish ONCE Foundation. As you can tell, our mandate is produce guidelines, recommendations for the member states and destinations to make their tourism more accessible, even including the communication and information technologies. But the problem is there was still no international standard for people to know what accessibility is about if you want to go from one country to another, because each country has different standards. So we joined forces with the Spanish Standardization Organization 5 years ago, the ONCE Foundation in Spain, to produce an international ISO standard for accessible tourism. After 5 years of very arduous work, it was adopted by ISO last year. So now it's a global policy document where you can see from the starting point when you start planning your vacation till the moment you get back home while having done all your activities, what the destination should do in order for you to have an accessible journey and a pleasant experience. So it's really focusing on the services because we are not experts in built environment, in architecture, because there are already standards when it comes to that. But if you have clients who are making their planning, 1 year I want to go to Indonesia, then in summer, in winter I want to go to Dubai, I don't know, for a shopping weekend. Then I want to go to Peru to see Machu Picchu. And then I want to go to New York. I'm just an avid traveler. So how the hell I know what their accessible tourism offer is about? Are they going to meet my requirements, my expectations? If there are no global standards, we are all doing our own business, but at the end, the customers need to cross international borders. International borders are just political aspects. But for a traveler who wants to travel, it's just a plane to catch. We don't care about the borders if you want to travel around. This year, we are going to start promoting, and especially next year, the implementation of this ISO standard. So we are going to issue just in a few weeks' time how destinations and national tourism authorities should implement this standard. We are also going to issue a flyer for the transportation sector, also for the cultural and natural resources, and this is going to be also for the accommodation sector because you need to also tell people, help them implement standards. It's not just preaching what they need to do. You need to help them by illustrating what kind of actions they can do in a sequence. So for example, what kind of answers NTAs and DMOs can find in this standard? For example, first of all, we should not see standards as obligations and legal imposition. Standard is a guide. If you want to get a standard, you buy it, you get certified. So it's your business if you want to get a standard. But standard is a set of guidelines, first of all. So it's not something that should be taken as an obligation. What market data is still scarce? Everything is scarce when it comes to tourism accessible tourism measurement because we don't have global statistics. We only have national estimates, regional estimates. How much money do people spend? But we know, for example, by some European studies, that one person is accompanied by two to three people. So if you just multiply that by the number of trips you make, this is incredible. For example, I get on a plane maybe 20 times a year. Sometimes I travel with my partner, with my family, alone. So there are many people like me. Or for example, our colleague Daniela Bass from New York who also needs to travel a lot for work. And just all of us. And so how do we provide key information? I think it was already tackled here. So we need information on accessibility in accessible formats and on accessible platforms. So all these three things have to fit in. Because if I'm not able to find what you're offering, I'm just going to contract another service. Because you're not giving me the information I need, so I'll just pass. I cannot spend 3 hours making phone calls to make sure that you're going to welcome me in dignified conditions. I just don't care. I go to the same old hotel, so people who are not doing this, they're losing customers. For example, there are hotels saying, in the statement, we are 100% accessible. There is no such thing as 100% accessible. Accessible is something that I decide what is accessible for me, but you give me the information, what do you offer as accessible? So I will decide whether it works for me or not. Which staff gets to be trained? Sometimes people train only the customer service staff at the front desk, but this is not enough. If managers are not trained, if the housekeeping staff is not trained, cleaning staff is not trained, so they will not know how to deal with equipment and how to deal with people who are being accommodated at their premises because they will be confused, afraid to help you out. They might be patronizing you and imposing things on you that you don't really need. So you need to really train all the staff, and it needs to be constant, refreshing, and continuous training. Also in this standard, we are talking about how to develop key indicators because each provision of the standard needs an indicator to be measured and also to measure return on investment because companies need help to measure return on investment and accessibility in order for them to show to the society that they have improved their business by including accessibility. And just a few words about the way forward for the national tourism organizations and destinations. Better accessibility as from now. if you construct something and in 5 years' time you need to put a ramp, you need to install a better elevator, you need to change the width of the doors, you're losing a lot of money. Because if you start thinking about accessibility from scratch, it's much cheaper for business owners and for the service providers. Strategic planning is very important. You need to have a vision, what do you want to achieve? Because if you're doing things in a erratic and kind of spontaneous way, you're just doing bits and pieces, so you're not getting the full picture. And gradual steps. Don't get afraid that accessibility needs to be a revolution in your company. 1 year you decide we have money for this, next year we improve something different. And also improving customer service and managers' mindset. The main thing about accessibility is the mindset, because we should all think, as I said before, sooner or later we'll be on the same boat, we'll be in the shoes of that person with disability. So the managers who are really investing and managing the service providers, they need to know that. Measuring and documenting, as I said, measuring before. Documenting, if you don't document the process that you are doing, you're not really following a strict sequence of things that need to be done, so you don't know where you failed. So you need to document what you're improving. And also integrated planning and budgeting. Accessibility should not be part of corporate social responsibility. It's not about charity. It's a business. It needs to be part of the core business strategy. So you decide, designate what budget is going to be dedicated to accessibility, but don't put it as a special program. It has to be part of the core management. I'm just going to take you through 3 brief cases of accessible destinations. For example, at the national level, Turismo de Portugal is a very good example because they have aligned their product development with all key national regulatory instruments, with the laws for people with disabilities, with the laws on accessible museums and cultural resources, with the laws on natural parks. They have accommodation classification requirements. You cannot get a certain number of stars if you're not accessible. For example, they have participated in the development of ISO standards. They have translated the ISO standards into Portuguese. Now they're implementing the standard in the country. And they also have accessibility as a prerequisite for funding. If somebody wants to apply for funding to organize an event like this, or open a new business in Portugal, if you don't have accessibility in your planning, you're not getting the public money. So it gets refused, and you have to put it in. And they also have national training at all official tourism and catering and hospitality schools that is also meant for the managers, for the teachers, and also for the students. Barcelona is one of the most accessible cities in Europe. They're focusing on the experience of people, both locals and visitors, so they're not focusing so much on disabilities. They're focusing on what is your experience. For example, 90% of subway stops are accessible. They have info on aid devices and orthopedic shops. That's, for example, very important for me. I don't know how. I get some bad luck when I travel, so my prosthetic leg always gets broken, and I need to look for orthopedic shops, so it's very important for different kinds of disabilities. And they're also matching accessible sports, healthy lifestyle, and tourism, because as a token of reminiscence to the Olympic Games. Because somebody mentioned before accessible sports. For example, I do horseback riding, I have a trainer for swimming, I have 2 personal trainers for other kinds of sports, so sports and accessibility is something about self-confidence, and I would say, like what you say here in Dubai, people of determination. These 2 destinations won Accessible Tourism Destination Award from UNWTO that we launched in 2019 with a neutral committee that was revising their applications. So next year we are going to resume that. So if you have an accessible tourism destination and you think you could get already surveyed by the criteria, it's interesting to apply. This is the 3rd case, a national park in Latin America. They have physical, social, and functional integration, for example. They have bridged 90% of barriers in a very complex national park with the cascades, very rugged landscape, geologically very, 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 very challenging and defying. And still, you see, you can go on top of the waterfalls and just observe them with or without disability, because everybody's using this boardwalk. And they have safety in protected areas, because it's very dangerous to make provisional improvements in accessibility without experts, without consulting people with disabilities, because injuries for people who have reduced mobility or any other disability are much worse than for people who just have all abilities at this moment of their lives. So we need to think about that also. And interpretation for different abilities, not disabilities. So they have like 3D models of animals, of plants, of the cascades, of the rocks. So this is a good example, for example, of natural areas. I'm a big fan of historical gardens, and sometimes I say I'm a reincarnation of an Italian because that's something I have in my heart since I was a child. So this summer, I was with my partner in Giardino di Tivoli. That is one beautiful villa from the Renaissance period, from the 15th century, close to Rome in Lazio. So you might ask me, well, how do you bridge all these obstacles? Well, there are golf carts that just give you the information at the palace. Well, I will take you down, and then when you go back, well, you just call me. But how do you deal with this if it's not reduced mobility? If you're blind, you cannot read, you don't really know what are the features, what is the shape of these beautiful historical fountains. So here, for example, you have an Italian in English. You have a 3D dimensions of the waterfalls, the kind of jets they have. And you also have Braille in English and Italian in a very, very, very simple board and that is placed in the park. So the message would be of my presentation that people with disabilities just want to enjoy their lives as everybody else. We want to be autonomous. When I had my surgery 4 years ago, I got amputated. After 2 months, I just said, I want to go on a trip. I was still in a wheelchair because nothing can stop you because you still have your character and your enthusiasm and passion to be the same person and have the same interest as you had before. So we should just think about equality, and sooner or later, you'll all appreciate accessibility put in place. Thank you.